The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Drugstore News webinar, the 2014 Cosmetics Industry Study Part 2. It's being sponsored today by the Tabs Group. I'm Rob Eder, Editor-in-Chief of Drugstore News, and I'll be today's moderator. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for today's webinar. We're very excited for a very engaging discussion today over the next hour or so with the folks at the Tabs Group. They're experts in consumer analytics, and they're going to be continuing their investigation of the cosmetics industry today. Today, we're going to examine shopping behavior and attitudes with respect to consumers' use of promotional offers and how promotional search behaviors affect consumer choice of outlets, channels, retailers, and brands. Before we start, I'd like to make a few brief housekeeping points. First, for better viewing experience, we recommend using the webcast window in full screen mode. There will be a brief Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can post questions through your screen at any time during the webinar, and they'll be answered at the end of the discussion. If we happen to run out of time before we get to all of your questions, our presenters will answer your questions via email. Finally, if you miss any portion of the presentation, you can view the on-demand version at drugstorenews.com. Also, if you missed Part 1 of the Tabs Group's 2014 Cosmetic Industry Study, it is also archived at drugstorenews.com. Now let's get started. Our speakers for today's webinar are Tabs Group CEO and founder, Dr. Kurt Jetta, and EVP David Butcher. Dr. Jetta founded the Tabs Group in 1998 with a mission of delivering analytical innovations that simplify and improve the way business analysis is conducted in the consumer products industry. The company has grown revenue by double digits every year since its inception. Dr. Jetta is a frequent contributor of articles in various industry publications and has made TV appearances on the likes of CNBC and The Today Show, and has been quoted in such national media outlets as the New York Post and Forbes. Prior to Tabs, he was CEO of baby feeding supplier Binky Grip-Tite. He held a variety of marketing and trade marketing positions at Playtex Products prior to that. David Butcher has worked in a wide range of senior-level positions in sales, marketing, trade marketing, and category management, including most recently as Vice President of Marketing for Rembrandt Oral Care. Prior to that, Butcher worked at Playtex Products for 13 years as Director of Field Sales and Director of Category Management and Trade Management, where he successfully restructured the sales organization to better align with top accounts and directed all broker sales, resulting in double-digit growth for that company. David began his career in the CPG industry at Procter & Gamble, working in sales on the Jif brand team. So now I'm going to turn things over to our speakers. Dr. Jetta, please take it away.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to Drugstore News for assisting and facilitating Part 2 of our cosmetics study. And thank you for all for attending. And for those that are regular attendees of Tabs Group webinars, very much appreciate you being a part of this series, and hopefully we can help you and add some insights into how you do your job. So today we'll talk about the cosmetics study part 2, and just before I go to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we will be doing a Twitter feed at Tabs Group Beauty, hashtag Tabs Group Beauty, so you can get some of the key highlights as I'm presenting. But today we'll talk about more getting into brand insights and consumer value and consumer attitudes, and a little bit more insight into the segmentation with this in this category. For those of you that attended Part 1, Dave Butcher, my associate and a partner at Tabs Group, gave you a lot of the interesting top-line information on who's buying, what they're buying, where they're buying, and then some of the more interesting topics on salon purchases and attendance, as well as some of the emerging segments in the category. Little background on the methodology. Whereas the last study we talked to not only women and men, this is focusing only on the women buyers in our survey. So 86% of the 1,000 women between 18 and 75 were category buyers, and that's the sample we're using in this study. Let me give you some background on some measures because we're going to use them or rely on them quite heavily. So first of all, we ask a brand awareness question. It is a closed-ended question, meaning there is a list of brands. Consumers just indicate, the respondents indicate which ones they are aware of, which ones they're not. There were 19 mass market brands and 11 specialty brands. And the way we're defining mass market brand is a brand who has predominant distribution in food, drug, mass, club, or dollar. So then by definition, the specialty is really all other. That's the department stores. It's Sephora, the beauty specialty, Sally Hansen, multi-level marketing, etc. Of those that are aware of the brand, of each of these brands, they are then asked the favorability on a 5-point scale from -2 to +2, very unfavorable to very favorable. We also ask about purchase behavior of the brand. So which of these brands that you're aware of did you purchase at least once over the last 12 months, and which of the brands did you purchase regularly? We're defining regularly as at least 3 times over the past 12 months. And from these metrics, we can create 2 other measures. Conversion to trial, which is the percent of people that are aware of brands that actually buy it, and then stated loyalty, the percent of people that buy the product at least once that buy it regularly at least 3 times. We've done quite a bit of validation work of these metrics over the years to make sure that they do corroborate and correlate with the measures we know to be truth from IRI and Nielsen and Household Panel. And as those of you that saw the last webinar might recall that Dave Butcher provided this real compelling correlation between some of these measures and what we see in market share. And we've done this across countries, across categories, so the conversion to trial and state of loyalty do correlate very highly to what you would expect to see in Household Panel and market share data. Now in this study we did a little bit of segmentation last time when we talked about light, medium, and heavy category buyers. Now there's 3 dimensions of behavior that we're going to look at. Category purchase, are you light, medium, or heavy of the category? And we're defining that based on how many segments they bought. So recall that we asked on nail polish and foundation and blush and lipstick. So there were 19 different segments in total. If they bought at least 10 of them, they're considered a heavy buyer, and that's almost 1/3 of the total buyer base. We also asked, on average, how much do you pay for your products on some of the key segments, and so we gauged the average price points that consumers are paying, from a low price, which is under $8, middle, medium, which is 8 to 15, and then over 15, where actually the average was around $22, the high price point. So you can see 1/4 of the consumers are paying well over $15 a unit. And then finally, we ask about deal purchasing. So we asked about 10 different tactics that they say they use when purchasing cosmetics, anything from using FSIs to loyalty programs to EDLP, to bonus packs, etc. So heavy deal purchases were ones that used between 5 and 10 tactics. So maximum was 10, and so about 22% of those were considered heavy deal purchasers. Now what we wanted to make sure is that we're not just kind of looking at the same segments with different dimensions, so we wanted to make sure we didn't have too much correlation between these 3 dimensions. And there are distinct demographic skews to each of them, and I found some of them really interesting. So Dave covered last time the income skew overall to heavy category purchasers. It's not the highest income, but it's above average. That's $70,000 to $100,000. And they are the millennials, the 18 to 34, so young professionals would be right in that target area. And as far as ethnic skews, we see that Asians, very high ethnicity and overall heavy category purchase. Then we looked at who's paying the high, what's the skew toward the people in this high price point? Well, those are, as you might expect, the high income individuals, $150,000 plus per year. They're more focused on the 25 to 34, so really those professionals. And then I found this very interesting, that there is a non-white skew to the people that are most likely to pay high price points. And that was Asians, Hispanics, and blacks all had higher incidence of paying high price points than whites. Now, what you find in this research data, and we only have a limited amount of time, that you stumble upon these interesting points, and it's real easy to get dragged into this rabbit hole of, exploring that. And unfortunately, I don't have the time, or nor did I have the time, to really explore that further on the why. But that certainly is a very interesting topic for follow-up, understanding why is there that particular ethnic skew toward high price points. And then the deal purchasing is a little less, not quite as upscale. So it is above average income, 50 to 74. So if you recall, the median income in the U.S. is 50,000, roughly 50, 52,000. It skews a bit more older, 35 to 54, which is typically that, now we're getting into the households with kids and those types of households, and it skews white. So you see there's, first of all, demographic skews. Now let's take a look at the true correlation between these groups. So first of all, we'll cross-tab category purchasing as a function of deal activity. So in the x-axis, we're looking at the various groups of deal activity. And then the category users, are they over or underrepresented in each of those buckets? So for example, light deal users account for 51% of all category users. But among light category users, they're actually 65%. So you see this very pronounced and very definitive correlation between deal activity and category purchasing. And we've seen that in every study the TABS group has done. That is vitamins, it's OTCs, it's consumables twice, and now it's cosmetics. And so here's where you see, here's 22% of the category buyers are heavy deal purchasers, but 32% of the heavy category buyers are heavy deal purchasers. So much higher incidence, and so it's a very strong cause and effect. In some of our prior webinars, I basically made that case and proved that point, that it is not correlation, but in fact causation. Now, what we're going to see later on is that that causation is not consistent across various segments. So that'll be some interesting discussion points. Now we're cross-referencing price points paid with deal activity, and here we see that and as you would expect, those that are paying high prices for cosmetics, you would expect them to be less price sensitive and therefore tend to be more likely to be light deal buyers, and we can see that right here. So 60% of the people paying a lot of money for their product, cosmetics, are light deal buyers versus the overall average of 51. So there is a relationship between these variables, but not strong. So we can see that we are getting some more mutually exclusive type of dimensions when we try and understand these various segments. And then the final combination is category purchasing as a function of prices paid. And what we see is that higher price buyers do tend to be heavier buyers, although it's not a dramatic skew. And here's this interesting little U-shaped function here that I can't quite figure out, except I will note that the people that are high price and heavy category buyers, there's a generational divide here. These tend to be younger, this 32% that are heavy category buyers versus the light category buyers tend to be a bit older. So there we've kind of just confirmed that we're not having this extreme amount of correlation between all these segments. Clearly there's some, but as we get into the data, we'll be able to see how there's really some distinct trend differences based on how we choose to segment the buyer groups. Now, another structure that we're going to create here is based on brand market structure, and it's a two-dimensional grid that is a function of awareness on one side, and we're going to group brands of the 30 we asked about. Either they're a mainstream brand or they're a niche brand. And then we'll also group them based on where they're distributed, in mass market or in specialty. So by construction, mainstream brands are defined as those brands that have at least 70% awareness. So it's not a qualitative assessment of thinking, well, they are or they aren't niche or mainstream. We just made a hard cutoff at 70% awareness. And just for brevity, these are what we would consider mainstream mass brands. We call it Maybelline, CoverGirl, Almay, Neutrogena, kind of the ones that are very well known, in fact, well known by almost everyone. We're going to call this Group A, so we're assigning a letter to each of these groups. And you can see the average favorability of 0.85, meaning it's somewhat favorable. It's not very favorable on average, but somewhat favorable. Now in Group B are your specialty, mainstream specialty brands, and that's ones that are, again, are very well known, Chanel, Clinique, etc. You can see very high awareness and favorability at a 0.86. The next group is my niche mass brands. So that's brands such as Physicians Formula and Jordana and Black Opal, a couple ethnic brands, or Elf that's been growing pretty nicely in the mass market. All of these have lower awareness. It ranges from a low of Boots at 30% to NYC at 63%. And then you can see the favorability that's substantially below the mainstream brands. And then finally, Group D is the niche specialty brands, so Bobby and Smashbox and Urban Decay. What we know about these brands is they have a distinctive younger skew to them. You can see the average awareness is 53% among the category buyers and a favorability of 0.64. Now, interestingly, at least I found this interesting, is overall the favorability among the mainstream groups was roughly the same, 0.85 versus 0.86. I would have hypothesized that specialty would have higher favorability, but that wasn't the case, although we'll see some certain segments where that is, in fact, the case. And then other interesting thing is the niche brands. The specialty brands had significantly higher metrics than the mass market brands, so 653 versus 43. And we can see that in a better here. So you can see similar awareness. There's a Group D, the niche specialty, higher than niche mass. And then the difference in favorability. And what you can see is that to know them is to love them a little bit more. So favorability highly correlated with awareness. But what we also see is that location trumps awareness or favorability in terms of driving penetration. So this is the average number of brands purchased at least once, and we see A is greater than B right here. So mainstream mass higher than specialty, and C is higher than D. Now here C is higher than D, even though it had a lower awareness and lower favorability, but there's a higher number of average brands purchased by quite a bit. We also just see that these mainstream mass brands have results that are much higher than the other brand profiles. So if you combine awareness and you combine location, I mean mass market, that's kind of the formula for getting the most amount of buyers. Now, that's not necessarily the end goal. I understand that the specialty brands tend to be higher priced and making higher margins, etc. But if they're, when setting expectations, just understanding that being in the right markets is really the biggest driver of getting maximum penetration. Then we can also see a difference in conversion to trial. So notice how the conversion levels are consistent from B to D, but again, mainstream mass much higher. Now, I also found this very interesting, is that despite all of these differences in all these groups in awareness and penetration and conversion and favorability, loyalty is pretty consistent across all four groups. Actually, the niche mass had the highest, but it wasn't statistically meaningful. So you have this convergence, which basically says that once people try you, I mean, it's going to be brand performance and product performance and not so much advertising or image or favorability or any of that stuff that determines how likely people are to come back and buy you. And remember, stated loyalty is those that purchase 3 times divided by those that purchase at least once. So now let's look at those metrics based on category buying levels. So we have the light, the medium, and the heavy buyers. We have groups A, getting a little ahead of myself here. So we have groups A through D. You can see the keys down at the bottom. Remember, it's mainstream mass, mainstream specialty, niche mass, niche specialty. Mainstream products are known by everybody, but as you can see, the niche brands, the awareness of those brands increases with more category involvement. Not a surprise, or shouldn't be. Here it's a little bit more interesting, so we can see that it is the niche brand, or I'm sorry, the specialty brands that derive a higher level of favorability among heavy buyers. So you can see on a percentage basis. So you can see here's the niche specialty, a fairly big jump here, and then here the favorability among those mainstream specialty brands actually is the highest of all among the heavy buyers. The mainstream mass, as I mentioned, dominates in the purchase indicators, but they really are heavily dominant among light and medium buyers. Once that gap now closes among heavy buyers, so now the heavy buyers are looking to fulfill their requirements, much more likely to go to the specialty outlets or the niche brands. Notice how on a marginal increase basis it goes down for mainstream mass, but it actually goes up for all the other three groups. We call that a convex function and then concave. So there's diminishing returns for mainstream mass and accelerating returns for the other three groups among heavy buyers. So that's how those heavy buyers are more likely to fill their requirements. And remember from the last webinar, the average number of brands bought by a heavy buyer is 8. They buy regularly 4. And so here we see that same dynamic on 3+. Here it's more of a linear function on mainstream mass, but again, that accelerating increase on the other three groups as far as heavy buyers, how much more they're buying. So this on a really accelerates. So if we broke it down kind of the shares, we would see the share among the mainstream mass among heavy buyers probably dip pretty significantly. Then we look at the conversion numbers and we see a very similar type of dynamic. And then we look at those loyalties though. So big differences among light buyers. So it's the specialty, mainstream specialty that has the highest loyalty and fairly much lower ones for the other three groups. But they all converge once people start actively shopping in the category. And it basically says there's a lot of good brands out there, a lot of brands deserving of representation. And it's not just the fact that there's a lot of good salespeople out there getting placement. It is a fundamental need of heavy buyers to have brand selection, and you really see that from all of these conversion and penetration metrics. Now let's divide it by price point paid, and here we call this the revenge of the hipsters. What do I mean by that? So let's break it down. So we're looking at the average awareness again, very similar, actually not a whole lot of meaning here, fairly stable among low, medium, high price. Check this out though. So here's mainstream mass. The favorability among mainstream mass as price points get higher, people paying high price on it, actually goes down. And the price, as price points go higher for these other three groups, the favorability goes up. So what does that mean? It means basically the more popular you become, the more people at that high end don't like you. There's a price, there's a cost to being too ubiquitous. And that lower favorability actually translates into significant declines in the number of brands purchased. So this is a very high correlation between lower favorability, lower number of brands purchased, and you can see how that favorability increases and translates into higher number of brands purchased. So these high price point buyers are now much more likely to turn away from mass mainstream and toward all the other three brand groups. And you see it in repeat purchasing 3+ times and conversion. So same thing. Now what we do see though is once a buyer is converted, no matter what brand profile they happen to be from, you see consistency then in the loyalty. So again, back to that product performance. So it's really this kind of image thing. And it's, why I just find this so interesting is we're seeing the same thing in the fashion industry in general. I mean, you see kind of fashion plates like Abercrombie, and you used to see it with the Gap back when they were popular. It seems to be there's this critical mass then of popularity and ubiquity to where once that kicks in, the favorability and the purchasing, at least among the high-end buyers, really starts to take a dive. Now let's look at the purchasing by deal, the low, medium, and heavy deal buyers. So one of the big paradigms in the industry is, oh, if I keep promoting, I'm going to hurt my brand image. And we've always had struggled to find if there's any really validation to that. Here there seems to be a little bit of that, but notice the mainstream mass. So there's no difference in awareness really based on the three deal buyer groups, but notice how the mainstream mass, that tends to be the heaviest promoters in the mass market, their favorability actually goes up. So there's actually no impairment to their favorability, but actually you do see a very slight decrease from the heavy buyers. Now that could also be some function of kind of department store buyers or some snob appeal or something, because recall that these are also just light deal buyers in general, but there is a noticeable decrease among these other three groups. However, that decrease really doesn't translate into negative trends on purchasing. You still see increases across the board in the number of brands purchasing. So more deal activity does lead to more purchasing for all the brand profiles, but particularly the mainstream mass. And you can see that linear function here and that gap now. I mean, this break really is what distinguishes most mainstream mass from all others, is kind of that whole utility of deals. You open up a circular of a CVS or a Rite Aid, or Target, you will see quite a few cosmetic ads, and that not only has not hurt their favorability and purchase and conversion and loyalty, but it's actually helped it. So you can actually see here's medium deal buyers, all four groups. The loyalty actually went up for all groups. So again, we don't see any negative, any major negative, I should say, metrics due to higher deal activity. Where we do see a disproportionate amount of positive benefit, though, is among these mainstream mass buyers, much less so among the other three brand profiles. Now let's take a look at the mass outlet shopping behavior, and we're going to look at the mass market share, so the food, drug, mass, club, and dollar store share of purchases. So this is not of dollars, it's not of units, of purchase occasions by segment. And what we see is it's really when we talk about price tier segmentation that most explains differences in the percent of share going to mass market. So by definition, they either go to mass or they go to specialty. So you can see how the low price point payers, 77% of their purchases done in mass, 23% in department store, and you see a major decline. So it's really a function of that price sensitivity that's driving much of their purchase behavior by outlet. The deal activity in cosmetics really doesn't explain a whole lot about where they're going, which I think I would have hypothesized a bit more explanatory power. And we do see actually some specific outlets where that does in fact have a factor. But as far as choosing between mass versus specialty, minimal effect here, modest category effects here. But so heavy buyers tend to be more oriented toward specialty outlets, but not strongly so. It's really a function of how much are they willing to pay for products. If you look at specific outlets, you may recall we did share the share of occasions by outlets, so we have all the specific retailers in mass market, which you can read from your IRI and your Nielsen data, but you only look at it as this is the universe. Well, here's the remainder of the universe, department stores and Ulta and Amazon and Sally Beauty. And I've highlighted particularly strong negative or positive skews, but here's the ones that really stood out to me. So as we noted, the department stores and specialty, and particularly department stores, Sephora and Amazon, really have this strong orientation toward high price point buyers. In fact, the #1 outlet is department stores, higher than Walmart. That actually dips quite a bit. It's Walmart and then dollar stores really have this strong performance. And I was very surprised by the dollar store. And what I'm surmising, because we don't have that visibility, is Dollar Tree. We know Dollar Tree is this kind of stealth powerhouse in the industry, and they do particularly well in cosmetics. And here's some, so we don't have specific outlets, Food, Family Dollar, Dollar General, and Dollar Tree, but just based on some of the information I've seen from other sources, it's heavily skewed toward Dollar Tree, this number. If we look at what outlets are affected by deal activity, you see this steadily increasing share for Target and Walgreens with heavy deal buyers. So it's not so pronounced that we highlighted it, but the fact that it's consistent and meaningful means there is something to that. So Target share in large part is being driven by attracting heavy deal buyers, as is Walgreens. CVS, not the case. And then finally, if we look at CVS and Walgreens in particular, those are the two drug chains that have been making a real strong push to kind of get some of the department store buyers and the beauty clinic type thing and specialty brands and beauty advisors. This data, and this was executed in December, suggests that they have not been successful at generating meaningful share among those buyers. Now, we can't measure if they've moved the needle. We'll be able to do that when we update this next year, but for what we see right now, they skew particularly low among the high-priced buyers, despite the fact that they've made some pretty significant efforts to increase that share. Also, what I found interesting, didn't bullet that out, look at Sally Beauty. That was the one outlet that had the least amount of variation across all the buyer groups. So they seem to have a pretty consistent appeal to all the various segments. And then Ulta actually has some decent appeal to quite a few segments, medium high price, medium heavy buyers. And the Ulta actually has that deliberate strategy of having both mass and specialty brands in their stores. Now let's take a look at attitudes. And so we asked a battery of questions and asked respondents to state their strong agreement. And some of you that were here last time might remember that good deals, I like to shop at outlets that offer good deals, by far was the most agreed upon comment. The minority of respondents say I only buy from a limited number of brands, and that didn't really discriminate buyer groups, nor did really good deals so much. So what does kind of identify differences in consumers? Well, price and promotion aside, and I know I've been talking about that a lot, but it really gets down to kind of an emotional connection and engagement. That's what really is driving heavy buyers. And if I look across what's the highest response to this among all the groups, I like to spend a lot of time shopping for just the right product. It's the heavy buyers that are really into it, and they also are much more likely to agree that I like to indulge myself with more expensive products. So that emotional connection is what gets them into the category and gets them heavily engaged. Beauty advisors has gotten a lot of press in the industry, in the mass channels, and we didn't see any evidence in the data that had much traction. Low price and medium price buyers, which skews heavily toward mass market, you can see very low agreement that they like to shop in outlets that have a beauty advisor. And even the high price buyers that skew toward department stores, only a third agreed with that. So even that doesn't seem to be a real big part of what's driving their particular outlet preferences. We see heavy deal buyers are more likely to embrace PVL, but even that is still fairly low. So PVL, and we can see that in the market share data, not a big factor in this category. But if the people that it does appeal to are actually the heavy deal buyers. And so that means that there is not an inherent conflict between the two of promoting the leading brands and supporting your private label. In fact, those two objectives are quite complementary. And then finally, the ability of deals to drive trial is low. So we hear a lot of people, there's so much negativity with deal buying. If you've heard me say that, it shouldn't be, but it is. But they say, well, at least I can use it to drive trial. Well, that's the one objective you don't want to have for trade promotion or deals in general. In fact, very few people say that they like to, when they buy something on promotion, it's something that they've never bought before. Much more likely to say they buy more than they typically buy on deal, and that's kind of the key driver of why heavy deal buyers. So you say, well, are they loading? No, they're not loading. They're using more, and they're using it for other things. They're giving it out as gifts. They're using it in multiple locations, say travel pack, or so. There's any number of reasons, but we don't see that there's this pantry loading has a negative effect. They're just buying more of a product to the exclusion of all of the other things they could spend their discretionary income on. So what's it all mean? Let's bring it on home. So first of all, and we didn't ask about it, but I think there's going to be, because you saw the whole non-white skew and high price and the whole hipster effect, I think if we had asked, and if anybody wants to explore that, I think you're going to come up with some pretty interesting stuff in understanding consumers demographically. Is county, where do they live? Is it urban, suburban, or rural? And I bet there's some real interesting differences in attitudes, even after controlling for other things like income. There's meaningful differences in your dynamics based on the brand profile. So it's a much difference in purchase levels and penetration based on awareness levels and location. But although those groups are different between themselves, within each group there is variability by brand. But do recall that the differences by group, those 4 groups, are quite strong and important to structure a framework for understanding this category. Similarly, another structure is the 3 segmentation profiles we discussed at length: category usage, prices paid, and deal activity. Strong overall story for the value of a wide brand selection. So there was this push, not too much anymore, but there was this major push to reduce brands, reduce inventory, make it less confusing. Now recall that not many people said the section was that confusing. And the evidence is really overwhelming that more brands lead to more sales, just like more deals lead to more sales for mainstream mass brands. That is disproportionately how heavy buyers are filling their requirements, is not more of the same brands they were buying, but a variety of different brands. So that means a significant niche brand representation is absolutely required if your goal is to capture heavy buyers and appeal to them. And if you want to get, what's the buzzword in this industry, loyalty, it's not so much throwing out loyalty card coupons, but it's providing the brand assortment that they're looking for. So what's the action items for mass market success? And I'm assuming 99% of the audience here is in the mass market. So first of all, improve the promotional execution, particularly for your mainstream mass brands. What that means is deeper, more products being promoted, and even more frequency wouldn't be such a bad thing. There's a very strong cause and effect between more deal activity and more sales for those brands. Halt the beauty advisor programs. Now, I don't have, obviously, access to all the inner workings and the internal strategic objectives of these retailers, but the economics can't be very good to have to hire somebody full-time to try and sell more face care and cosmetics and fragrance. And from this research, it just says that it's not that appealing anyway to buyers, and we don't see that it's really worked all that well among the 2 top drug chains. Ensure a broad assortment of mass niche across multiple price points, so we're not just talking more the higher end with say a Physicians Formula or Elf or some of those brands, but also the lower end niche brand, lower price, so a Jordana or an NYC also. So multiple price points and multiple brand assortments, and add specialty brands, even if it's by, how shall we say, non-traditional means. So why not try and bring in an Estee Lauder or a Clinique? No different, and I see it as the same analogy as when hair care brought in all the salon brands. First it was a trickle, and then it was a flood, and it was definitely a source of incremental growth. We see some strong shares among medium and heavy buyers and medium and heavy price points at Ulta that actually has that as a deliberate strategy. So before I turn it over to Rob, let me just remind you that we are available for additional consultation, particularly to do a more deep dive review from this data. So we didn't get into some of the brand specifics on purchase levels and how they attitudes differ for the various groups. And so that would all be included in a deep dive, as far also getting into some of the specifics on outlets. And so you can contact us through the email right here, webinar@tabsgroup.com. So now let me turn it over to Rob, and thank you very much. And any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Dr. Jetta, and we're going to start with the questions. We've got a few of them here, and one, we covered this during the housekeeping remarks, but just for anyone who missed it, if you missed any part of today's presentation, today's webinar, it is available for download, and it is archived on our website at www.drugstorenews.com. In addition, if you missed part one, that is also archived on the site and available for download at your leisure. Our first question, Kurt, Dr. Jetta, it's drilling down into some of the brand specifics which you mentioned, but are there any additional brand-specific information that was particularly interesting that we could share with the audience?
Well, that would be, most of that would be included in the deep dive follow-ups. I mean, a few, I guess that a couple interesting things is there were quite a few brands, particularly in the niche, that had low favorability, low penetration, but very high loyalty. Conversely, you saw an opposite on some of those mainstream mass brands. So high penetration, high favorability even, and then the loyalty actually was below some of their competitors. So it's that there's a lot of that, and that's really key, is to kind of benchmark yourself. And just to give something in isolation wouldn't have the value of really benchmarking your brands versus the competitors, and that have similar brand profiles. And then also the ethnic cosmetics I found fascinating, because there was that demographic skew that I just would not have expected.
Terrific. Our next question, what are some of the implications for advertising and communication strategies based on this study?
Well, I mean, I'll qualify that by just saying that, obviously you want to do a much deeper dive into that, but here's the way I read it. Because there was definitely this relationship between awareness and penetration, and then awareness and favorability, although the marginal increase in favorability, so twice the awareness didn't generate twice the favorability, basically. There just struck me as a diminishing return. I mean, I think a lot of the advertising copy strategy is more image related. And if you say, well, which of those dimensions does image advertising appeal to? It's to make me popular and favorable. And there definitely seems to be that kind of diminishing return to that, and possibly there's a bit over. So if you're going to spend the same amount, then it should be more product-oriented, or just kind of news about what types of products you have in your line. Obviously don't give up the whole creativity in the communication, but just by having celebrities and that type of thing, and there just seems to be a kind of a bit of an excess in that, based on how I was reading the correlations between, say, favorability and loyalty. So there was no improvement really in loyalty in the mainstream mass brands, despite the massive differentiation in spending versus the niche brands.
Okay. Next question. Implications for innovation strategies. Are there any important takeaways that would help inform the innovation strategies of any of the marketers or retailers that are that are part of our audience today that came out of the study?
I guess one overall, it seems, and the market's already kind of responding to this already, but the market seems very ripe to embrace innovation. I mean, there's always something new, and the reason I say that is, look how many different product types heavy buyers are buying. I mean, we asked about 19 of them, and about a third of them said they buy at least 10 of them. So there's always that ability to keep innovating and keep coming out with new product. And that innovation, it does seem to be kind of probably get marginally more impact from some of the niche brands and more the specialty outlet brands versus mainstream mass. I mean, they really have their work cut out for them because they're just so ubiquitous, and we saw that decline in favorability. So I guess innovation is a key part of helping them continuing to grow, because they can't get any more awareness. Their favorability is pretty much maxed out. Loyalty is going to be pretty consistent. So how do you keep growing? And I guess the innovation would be really kind of the main thing.
Well, Dr. Jedi, you just mentioned it, the impact of becoming a bit too ubiquitous, the downside of that for the brands. So how does a brand balance between the need to generate awareness and that fear of becoming too mainstream?
I think that is an issue, and this is the first time I've ever seen quantitative proof of it. But I mean, I think there's always been this notion, kind of the Yogi Berra line, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. I mean, the version of cosmetics is nobody buys the leading brands anymore, they're too popular. And it kind of spans beyond just cosmetics, and as I've noted, in fashion, etc. So then that would kind of, you'd say, if there is some strategy that, hey, I want to kind of start trying to convert department store buyers or those people that are paying high prices, that's probably not going to be an efficient use of funds. You're better suited to try and go squarely against the core target, the light buyers, the medium buyers, the heavy deal buyers, where you can have a much higher likelihood of success. Certainly, though, you see that, I mean, all those tens of millions of dollars in advertising don't seem to be, the formula to stem that tide of declining favorability among those high-end buyers. So then you have to ask yourself, so then why am I doing it? Why am I spending quite so much? Maybe can I redeploy that for other types of communication strategies or promotional strategies or innovation?
Excellent. Since spending time shopping is really an important purchase attribute for most buyers, so how can brands and retailers enhance the shopping experience? What can they do to partner together to make it just a richer experience?
I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence that they were dissatisfied, actually. So, because, I mean, we asked, did they find it confusing, and there was not a whole lot of, and actually, I mean, even the highest group was in, whatever it was, 25, 30%. I mean, we do some categories where that's well over 50. I mean, they just find it a muddled mess. So, from that perspective, the brand, kind of the merchandising schemes definitely help enhance that shoppability. So as far as merchandising scheme, the only thing, I mean, I don't think there's any obvious answer to that except, how do I make it a better experience? Give them more stuff to choose from. And that doesn't mean adding yet another 4 foot of, of the same brand that I already have 16 feet of. Maybe it's a new line extension of, really truly new innovation from that brand. Maybe it's another niche brand. Maybe it's some interesting configuration of a mainstream brand that's, promotion and in and out promotion, and you want to kind of stimulate that incremental purchase. So I guess kind of from a merchandising strategy, nothing obvious, but for satisfaction with the experience, it would be more, not less, brand selection.
Okay. Next question. It's about trade promotion, Dr. Jetta. What are the most effective types of trade promotion that a brand should consider to drive sales?
I mean, if you want to keep it easy and effective and potentially profitable, and when I say potentially because that's an execution issue that you need to work with as a manufacturer, you need to work with your buyer to make sure both sides are making money. It's the traditional circular with a compelling price point with the maximum number of entities or products within that ad. So just having an ad in a high-profile location at a compelling price point for, say, Maybelline Great Lash Mascara, that's not maximizing or even coming close to maximizing the potential, because that is, even, which is, and I use that because that's a, among the highest loyalty products and sub-brands in the whole category. But that's only, what, 10, maybe 15% of the whole Maybelline brand, where you would want to put the whole Maybelline brand in there and maybe highlight the Great Lash or, some of the other, but, so that is kind of the old school traditional ways of promoting have always been and continue to be effective. And if you've listened to any of my other webinars, kind of I provide, evidence ad nauseum that all the new stuff, loyalty cards, digital, is not working. Some of the promotional, other than kind of high-low type of promotions, the special packs and the promotional packs and the kind of the unique in and out things always are a strong seller and always a great source of incremental volume, particularly to those heavy buyers that love to shop and find those. And it could be a deal, it could be just kind of two things together, or, however, I mean, you're more, obviously the people in the audience are more creative than me on those types of things, but, something that they can't always get that in and out impulse purchase.
Okay. And Dr. Jetta, it looks like we've got one more question from the audience. To our audience, we've got about 5 minutes left, probably enough time for 1 or 2 more questions. So please, if you do have a question, please post it into the question box on your screen. And without any further ado, if there are no further questions, the last question, Dr. Jetta, is: was there a best-in-class example of a beauty brand or a retailer that's doing a good job based on the customer perspective?
That's a good question. And the answer is they're all doing a pretty good job. And we gauge that based on share. So we have a stated loyalty not only for brands, but for retailers as well. I would say, as far as kind of a and you could have a strategic argument if this is a good or a bad thing, but Sally Beauty certainly is hitting all the segments and appealing to a wide variety of segments, and to the extent that their whole reason for being is beauty, that's probably what they need to do versus kind of appealing to just a few key segments. So that would probably be one. I really like the way Ulta has a deliberate strategy of both mass and specialty, and that is supported by the data in this research and because there is a lot of crossover in those brands. So they get that, and they get a variety of price point sensitivities along the way. As far as brands that are doing a best-in-class job, man, that's a hard one because I'm going to name somebody and offend others. But, I mean, what comes to mind always, I'll go back to the Maybelline Great Lash because it is really hard to use. You do see this, lack of, differentiation and loyalty. All the brands are all pretty good. But, Great Lash I've seen a lot of research that, shows it kind of is, really stands out from that standpoint. Another one I would point out is Physicians Formula, only because of kind of knowing who they are, which is more of the niche or the complementary product. So they don't have the mainstream products like the foundations and the mascaras. They have bronzers and face powders and those types of things. And that is the type of stuff that rounds out the market basket for the heavy buyers. And so if they focus on that, and they've done a real good job over the years at doing that, that is kind of a nice complementary offering in the overall assortment where everybody has a mascara and a foundation, but not a whole lot of variety in some of those secondary areas.
Okay. Well, Dr. Jetta, thanks very much. We're just out of time, folks. If you have any more questions for our panelists, they'll populate in our queue, and our panelists will reach out to you separately. Dr. Jetta, if folks want to get in touch with the TABS group, what's the best way to contact you folks?
The email, that webinars@tabsgroup.com would be any requests for additional information, any follow-up questions. I do want to get in one final plug as far as best-in-class, and it's not even so much a best-in-class, it's just the most underdeveloped is the case for value brands. I mean, the research clearly showed that, lower price points like Wet n Wild and NYC and Milani and Jordana all could succeed and have a place in the market. And you see even the mass market retailers, the Walmarts or the Targets of the world, are very underrepresented there. They're highly productive. There's a market there that if they can't find them in their store, they're going to Dollar Tree or they're going to Dollar General. So that is kind of one of the big opportunity areas I see in the marketplace.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the TABS Group and Drugstore News, I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. Remember, if you missed any portion of the presentation, you can go to drugstorenews.com and view the on-demand version. It should be available under the Insights tab on our homepage. And if you scroll down under that, you will just find the webinars, and they will be archived there for your download at your leisure. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.